What if I were to tell you that most of the things you've heard about money are completely wrong? It seems like everyone has an opinion on everything related to money, and while a lot of them have their heart in the right place, their tips can be misleading and sometimes even outright harmful to your finances. After working in the finance industry for over 5 years, I've heard it all, and I think it's time we clear up some of these money myths once and for all. What's up, guys, and welcome back to Centsible Capital. I'm Jake, and today we're going to debunk 3 of the biggest money myths that could be holding you back from reaching your full financial potential. This video marks the start of a Money Misconceptions series where I'll be breaking down some of the biggest money myths that I've come across in my time working as a licensed investment advisor. Hey guys, real quick, before we get into these, go ahead, like and subscribe. It helps me out.
She's done.
All right, geez. Just calm down for a sec, okay? Myth number 1, I'm too young to start investing. Now, you wouldn't believe it, but this is probably one of the most harmful money myths that's out there. I'll be straight with you. The idea that you're too young to start investing is ridiculous. And the people who are saying this are ignoring some of the most powerful concepts in all of finance: time value of money, compounding, and opportunity cost. Without getting too technical, these concepts are essentially saying that to achieve financial success, you need to invest as early, as often, and as much as you can. You see, investing's like a race, only it's not a 100-meter. It's a marathon, an ultra marathon even. And the sooner you get started, the less effort you're going to have to expend to catch up in the future. Some people might think it's ridiculous, but the very first thing I did after turning 18 was open my very first Roth IRA and invest what little amount of money I had. And thanks to taking that initiative early on, I was able to build up a $100,000 plus investment portfolio before I was 25 without ever having a ridiculously high salary. Now, I'm not telling you any of this to try to brag, because believe me, there are people who've done a lot better than I have, but to tell you that time is your best friend as an investor. The more you have, the better. And you can use it to your advantage by starting as early as possible. It's not only possible, but extremely advantageous to start investing before you're even 18 if you can get the help of your parents to open up a custodial account. On the other hand, if you're a parent, do your kids a favor and open up an investment account for them today. It's one of the single biggest advantages that you can give them in life, but don't take my word for it. Let's run some numbers so you can see just how much difference a few years can make. So in these examples, we have a few assumptions that'll stay constant. We start with $0, invest $100 each month, earn a 10% average annualized rate of return, which is about what the S&P 500 has returned since its inception without adjusting for inflation, and we'll plan to retire at 65. In our first example, let's assume that you're just getting started at age 30. Using the numbers we laid out, in 35 years when you're 65, you'd have a total of $325,229.24. A great number, but we can do better. Next up, let's assume that you're getting started a bit earlier at age 20. Using the same numbers, in 45 years when you're 65, you'd have a total of $862,685.80. Over 2.5 times higher, with only changing the amount of time that you're investing. And lastly, let's assume that you're lucky enough to have gotten your parents' help and they set up an account for you when you're 10. Using the same numbers, in 55 years when you're 65, you'd have an incredible total of $2,256,709.71, almost 7 times higher than if you didn't get started until age 30. The numbers don't lie. Investing earlier lets you unlock even more of the power of compounding, and as you can see, leads to an exponentially higher number at the end. When it comes to getting started investing, it's safe to say that sooner is always better. Myth number 2. Credit cards are evil. Ah, yes, the classic. Nothing like attributing moral values to an inanimate piece of plastic. To get a better idea of just how ridiculous this statement is, I brought along a little friend to help me out here. This is a hammer. His name's MC. MC Hammer here is what we would call a tool. And like other tools, he can be used to do all kinds of great stuff, like build a table or a house. Or you could also use them to break a bunch of stuff too. Kinda like that little plastic rectangle in your wallet there. If used responsibly, it could save you some money here and there. or it could ruin you financially. This is entirely dependent on the person using the tool. Yes, I hate to break it to you, but you do bear at least some responsibility for that credit card debt. There might not be a more polarizing topic in all of personal finance than credit card usage. On the one hand, you've got people who are juggling dozens of cards and spending hours trying to optimize their usage. And on the other hand, you've got people like our friend Dave Ramsey, who are vehemently anti-credit card and would probably try to hunt you down for even considering to open one. Now, I personally fall more towards the former, since I've got over 14 credit cards myself, and I'll tell you why. Since we know that credit cards are just a tool thanks to our buddy MC Hammer, and they're only as good or bad as the person using them, let's talk about what would constitute good or bad credit card usage. Using a credit card responsibly requires that you maintain a constant state of self-discipline, and yes, this is asking a lot. It entails making your payments on time and in full, and only spending what you can afford and is properly budgeted beforehand. If you're able to do these things, yes, credit cards can be a fantastic tool. But if you neglect even one part of this, a credit card could very quickly turn from being helpful into being a massive detriment that you'll dread even thinking about. Going back to my own personal example, I can have over 14 credit cards because I strategically applied to them over a long period of time, tracked my spending diligently and didn't change my purchase habits because of them, and paid whichever ones that I'm using currently off in full multiple times each month to avoid interest. And because of this, I've saved thousands of dollars over the years and never paid a single penny in interest. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of people who can say the same, and I'll tell you why. This is the part where there's definitely some truth to Dave's claims, and this is one of the most overlooked parts of using credit cards. Credit cards have an extraordinary ability to enable people. Enable them to spend money that they otherwise wouldn't have if they didn't get that credit card in the first place. You see, psychologically, it's way easier to just swipe a credit card than it is to hand someone physical cash for something. It's just the way our brain works. Look, when it comes down to it, credit cards are just tools. Using them properly can save you extra money, provide you additional fraud protections, and give you benefits that you otherwise wouldn't get. But the responsibility falls on you to make sure it doesn't overwhelm you. Myth number 3, student loans aren't a big deal. This myth is particularly hot right now with student loan forgiveness looking like an actual possibility, but the reality is that no debt should be taken lightly, and not all debt's created equally. For instance, if I were given a choice between an equivalent amount of student loan debt and credit card debt, I'm taking the student loan debt every time. But that doesn't mean that it can just be ignored. It can and should be a big part of the decision of where, when, and if you even go to college at all. Now, I'm not going to be the guy to tell you whether you should or shouldn't go to college. That's entirely dependent on your situation and your goals in life. But it would be ignorant to not consider the implications of student loan debt as a part of that conversation. Whether you're going to college soon or right in the middle of it as we speak, it's important to have at least some sort of a plan so that you don't end up endlessly bouncing from major to major, accruing more and more debt in the process. Consider whether going to that school out of state is really worth the extra cost, or if you could get the same experience by staying closer to home. Is that obscure major really in demand, or are you going to be fighting an uphill battle for years to come? How likely are you to have a decent paying job and have some upward career mobility? These are all factors to be considered here. I'm not telling you just to look at things coldly and pick the major that gets you paid the most, but you do need to be honest with yourself and just understand that following some passions leads to an increased financial burden. Aside from that, you still have to ask yourself, is college even right for me at all? And there's no shame in saying no. There are plenty of people who follow paths that don't involve college who end up having incredibly fruitful careers. In my case, despite being accepted in several other schools, I opted to go to one that would be a bit cheaper, knowing that the degree would be roughly equivalent and I'd be able to tackle that cost much more easily. Now, I'd be lying to you if I told you it wasn't a grind. Working full-time, going to school full-time, but making these decisions enabled me to graduate without any debt, and has lifted a tremendous weight off my shoulders ever since then. Now stick with me because this is where it gets interesting. Making these decisions early on doesn't just impact student loan debt. By taking steps to try to lessen your debt load from the very beginning, you're positioning yourself to be able to invest more money that much sooner, since you won't have to pay as much towards your loans in the future. This is going back to one of those concepts I briefly touched on earlier of opportunity cost. By making the decision to go to the more expensive school, to take the more costly route, you're putting yourself in a position where you may not be able to invest quite as much or quite as early as you would had you taken maybe a little bit of a different path. See, that decision of when, where, and if you're going to go to college at all is now compounding over time and is affecting the rest of your financial well-being for better or worse. Some paths, especially higher level degrees, will inevitably incur a very large amount of student loan debt. But all that being said, it's important to keep in mind that with proper planning before, during, and after you accrue that debt, you can minimize the impact that it has on your life. Student loan forgiveness can be an awesome thing to look forward to if you're sitting on piles of loans, but it's important to keep in mind that until it actually happens for you, you cannot count on it, and you should take steps to plan accordingly. All right, guys, that does it. 3 of the biggest misconceptions about money that I've ever heard. I hope you got something out of this. If so, do me a favor, like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if there's any particular money myths you'd like to hear about in future videos. Like I said, I'm planning on doing many more as a part of this series, so I'd love to hear if there's anything that stands out to you. I'm Jake, this is Sensible Capital, and always remember to be sensible.